And here it is. So on the exam, when you see this, you will have to copy the molecule out. So get practice drawing stick figures and copying them out. And a stereocenter for us is a carbon that has 4 different substituents. There are other atoms that are stereocenters. We're not going to get into that. It's going to be carbon. And I'm not going to pick this carbon as a stereocenter because it has 3 identical H's on it. I am going to pick this carbon here to be a stereocenter because here, I'll do a second copy of the molecule. Oh, copy paste. And I'm going to put on the missing substituents, although you don't have to do that on the test. You don't have to show me H's that are missing. That's not part of the answer. But that's an H there, which means the 4 substituents are a CH3, which is a methyl, a hydroxyl, a hydrogen, and a carbon. You put an asterisk on it. Same story here. There's a 4th group that's hydrogen, and an NH2, and a carbon, and a carbonyl. An sp2 carbon will never be a stereocenter because it only has 3 things attached to it. How can you have 4 different groups when you only have 3 things attached? You can't. With this hydrogen here, that makes this a stereocenter. I don't have to draw the hydrogen there to show it's a stereocenter. It's there. Do not put an asterisk here. There's 2 identical H's. You need 4 different substituents. There's an H missing off of here, which makes that a stereocenter. It's got a methyl on the left, an ethyl on the right, and a carbon with a nitrogen up there. And up here, we got a hydrogen. And as you're reading about stereocenters, please do not get the impression that a stereocenter always has an H on it, because you can have 4 different carbon groups and be a stereocenter. This molecule doesn't happen to have that, but you'll see stereocenters where there's not even an H on there. As long as there's 4 different groups, you have a stereocenter. So there's your stereocenters. I just want to be very clear. You don't have to draw the H's. Don't have to draw the H's. That's supposed to be an exclamation point. All right. So we got part A done. Identify all the functional groups. Point to the functional groups with an arrow from your label. Okay. So we have an amine. A nitrogen attached to 1 carbon is an amine. You don't get full credit for that answer. Amines and amides need a numerical designation as well. Remember, the nitrogen groups, you count how many bonds to carbon the nitrogen has. So that's a primary amine. Okay. You want to just do the nitrogens first? Why not? These, I turned my pen off again. These nitrogens are both the same functional group. You can save yourself a little time. And they're both nitrogens with 2 bonds to carbon, secondary. Don't write amine. When one of the carbons is a carbonyl, you write amide. We have another amide here, but the nitrogen has 3 bonds to carbon. It's a tertiary amide. And we have an alcohol here. There's an OH here and an OH down here. This OH is attached to a carbon right here that's not a carbonyl. So this is an alcohol. Now you also need a classification for alcohols with a number in front and a degree sign. You don't classify how many bonds the O has to carbon. you classify how many bonds the carbon that's attached to the OH has to carbon. Coincidentally, it's the same number as the previous thing I said, but that's meaningless to say it's primary because it's got one bond to carbon. That would make every alcohol ever a primary. This alcohol here is primary because that carbon has one bond to carbon. And down here, that pattern of CO2H, whether it's written forwards or backwards, as always, as an earlier segment today showed, carboxylic acid. If you change this H to a carbon group, this would be a carboxylic ester. And that's not what we have here, so don't label it. Oh, we have an alcohol that I missed. There's an alcohol. You can point to the vicinity there. I pointed to the carbon that you should be looking at because that carbon has two bonds to carbon. 1, 2, and that's the alcohol carbon. That's what you classify and tell me you know it's an alcohol. And that is pretty straightforward for that, I hope. And at this time, I just want to ask, do you have any other questions before we end today's Q&A? I think it's been good. We're going to get